When I inherited my grandfather's 20-acre farm in suburban Georgia, I thought I'd finally found peace. After years of city noise and corporate life, the cracked earth, rustling cornfields, and distant whinny of horses felt like home. It wasn't paradise yet, it needed work, but it was mine. No mortgage, no office politics, no neighbors knocking on my door. Well, that last part didn't last long. 3 months after moving in, a letter stamped HOA mandatory response showed up in my mailbox. I raised an eyebrow. My farm wasn't part of any homeowners association, at least not to my knowledge. Grandpa bought the land before any subdivisions were even built around here. I opened the envelope, expecting maybe a welcome notice. Instead, I got a formal reprimand for non-compliance with neighborhood aesthetic standards. Apparently, my red barn didn't match the neighborhood's earth tone palette. I laughed it off. I figured it was a mistake. But that was my first interaction with Karen, president of the Silver Oaks HOA. Karen Davenport had the kind of voice that could curdle milk. Sharp, nasal, and always carrying the implied threat of a fine. She didn't knock to talk. She announced herself through a bullhorn of emails, letters, and warning signs. Her picture-perfect house sat across the road from my farm, all pristine hedges and white shutters. I noticed she never waved. The conflict began slowly. First it was the barn color. Then it was unauthorized livestock. My chickens. She claimed their morning clucks disturbed the community's tranquility. I responded politely, even offered her some fresh eggs. She declined with a pinched smile and a complaint to the county. I could tell she hated that my land wasn't under her control. The HOA covenants didn't apply to my farm. Grandpa's deed predated the entire subdivision. I was an independent island, and Karen couldn't stand it. Then came the festival. Silver Oaks held an annual Fall Fest at their community park every October. This year their park had drainage issues, so Karen got creative. Without asking me, without even informing me, she relocated the event's parking lot to my farm. It started on a Friday evening. I returned from the feed store and found my property swarming with cars. Rows and rows of SUVs, minivans, and golf carts packed my eastern pasture. People were tailgating. Kids were running through my garden. One child was using my horse as a selfie prop. I blinked stunned. Then I saw the signs, handwritten and zip-tied to my fence. Silver Oaks parking. $5. Overflow parking available on East Lot. Courtesy of the HOA. Courtesy of the HOA. I stormed across the field, weaving through the mess. A few neighbors smiled, waved as if I was part of the attraction. I finally spotted Karen at a fold-out table near the fence, sipping cider and directing traffic like a smug little general. "Karen," I said sharply. "What the hell is this?" She smiled too bright. "Oh hi. We didn't think you'd mind. You weren't answering your emails. This space was just sitting here." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You're charging for parking on my land." "Technically," she said, fluttering her fingers, "it's for the community. The HOA is collecting fees for infrastructure improvements. You're benefiting too, better roads, better property values." "My land doesn't even fall under your jurisdiction," I snapped. "You had no right." Karen's smile thinned into a weapon. "Well, maybe if you were more involved, we wouldn't have had to improvise. Look around. Everyone's having a great time. You wouldn't want to ruin that, would you?" Before I could speak again, she turned away, dismissed me like a contractor with an overdue invoice. The rage settled deep in my gut. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Karen didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw my farm as an obstacle, a piece of ungoverned real estate she could slowly absorb or bully into compliance. She was using my land to build her empire, starting with a parking lot. That night, after the last car pulled out and left tire ruts in my soil, I walked the property with a flashlight. My vegetable beds were trampled. One of my goats had a bloody gash on her leg. Trash littered the fence line. I found beer bottles near the hay barn. I didn't sleep. The next morning, Karen had the gall to send a follow-up email thanking me for my generous community spirit and suggesting we discuss future collaboration opportunities. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out the thick folder my grandfather left behind. Paperwork, maps, old correspondences with the county. I spread them out on the dining table, sipping black coffee as the sunrise lit the yellowing pages. My fingers found the deed, rough and official. And then I noticed something small but powerful. Clause. A protection clause embedded in the land grant, written in old legalese. My farm wasn't just exempt from HOA covenants. It had historical land status. And that meant something very different in legal terms. I sat back, a slow smile forming. Karen had made a critical mistake. She thought I was just a recluse with a tractor and some goats. But I had something better than influence. I had leverage. And now that she'd drawn first blood, I wasn't going to play nice. Karen Davenport had mistaken my silence for surrender. That was her second mistake. The first, of course, was using my land as a public parking lot. The Monday after the festival, she strutted across the gravel road that separated her manicured kingdom from my muddy driveway. She was in full battle regalia, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand, and a smile that belonged on a crocodile. "I wanted to thank you personally," she began, as if last weekend hadn't been a violation of every boundary I had. "The Fall Fest was a huge success. People just loved your property. Maybe next year we can host the whole thing here. Imagine the possibilities." "I'm imagining something," I said dryly. "Mostly attorneys." Karen let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, you're funny. But let's be serious. This kind of goodwill goes a long way. Property values are up already. The HOA board is very appreciative." "Karen," I said, stepping forward. "You trespassed. You charged people to park on land that doesn't belong to you. You damaged my property. You put my animals at risk." Her smile twitched. "Well," she sniffed, "if we're splitting hairs, technically your gate was unlocked. Because it's my farm, not Fort Knox." She didn't reply. Instead, she looked around, her gaze sliding over my crooked fence posts and weathered silo like she was evaluating it for demolition. "You know," she said, "this place could really shine if you tidied up a bit. A fresh coat of paint. Maybe a community vegetable patch. Something more cohesive with silver oaks." I stared at her. "You want to turn my land into a neighborhood amenity." She offered a prim nod. "Think of it as giving back." I laughed. Short, disbelieving bark. Karen flinched. That night I compiled everything. I took photographs of the trampled garden beds, the tire-marked pasture, the gash on Daisy's leg. I filed a police report for trespassing and damage to property. Then I made a few calls, to a land use lawyer my grandfather once worked with, and to the county zoning office. The next few days passed in a flurry of paperwork and phone calls. And with each legal document I uncovered, the situation became more absurd. Not only was Karen's use of my land unauthorized, but under my property's historic land designation, any public event held on it without permission was a direct violation of zoning laws, and came with hefty fines. Not for me. For her. But Karen didn't know that yet. No, she was still operating under the assumption that I was a pushover. So when I received an official-looking notice from the HOA demanding that I remove unsightly debris and non-compliant fencing within 10 business days, I wasn't even surprised. She was escalating. I walked across the road and hand-delivered a response. Karen opened the door and took the envelope with an arched brow. "What's this?" she asked. "Just a little paperwork," I said. "Consider it my reply." Inside was a formal cease and desist letter, and attached to it, a copy of the complaint I'd filed with the county zoning office, complete with images of her festival, cars littered across my pasture like a bad joke. By Thursday, she'd stopped waving her clipboard like a scepter. By Friday, the HOA's lawyer had contacted me with an offer to amicably resolve the misunderstanding. But I wasn't looking for an apology. I was looking for leverage. And as I dug deeper, I found it. Buried in the HOA's public records, minutes from a board meeting 2 years ago, was a line item about expanding community amenities. Specifically, acquiring unused land adjacent to Silver Oaks for development into recreational or event space. My land. They'd been eyeing it for years. That's when the final piece clicked into place. Karen wasn't just power tripping. She had a plan, long-term, calculated. First annoy me with citations. Then occupy the land under the guise of community good. Then, eventually, strong-arm me into selling. But she hadn't accounted for my patience, or my ability to play the long game. So I played along. I emailed the HOA lawyer and expressed my willingness to explore options for formal collaboration, provided they cover damages and issue a written apology. Karen must have fumed when she read that. She thought I was backing down. I wasn't. I was baiting her. The following week, Karen sent over an itemized breakdown of what she called a proposed integration agreement. It was absurd. She offered to purchase permanent parking easement rights to part of my land for $2,000. Barely enough to fix my fencing, let alone repair the damage her carnival of a community had caused. I didn't respond. Instead, I called the county again, this time to confirm something I discovered in an old dusty binder of Grandpa's. A clause that allowed me to commercially lease the land for limited periods, so long as the activities didn't interfere with its historic designation. Which gave me an idea. A wild, petty, perfect idea. The next morning I began calling every event planner, wedding coordinator, and touring company I could find within 50 miles. I made a deal with a biker club. Another with a regional farmers market. I set up online ads. I offered my land, my beautiful stubborn farm, as the new go-to venue for festivals, markets, and rallies. Karen wanted community engagement. She was about to get it. And best of all, it was 100% legal. My land. My rules. By the time she noticed the "now booking private events" banner strung across my gate, I'd already locked in 3 months' worth of bookings. The first. A vintage car show hosted by a motorcycle collective. Dozens of roaring Harleys and muscle cars rumbling through Silver Oaks. The HOA's inbox exploded. Neighbors complained. Karen's voice screeched through town halls and HOA meetings like a siren. But I hadn't broken any laws. Not one. Karen had brought the fight to my doorstep. Now it was her turn to feel cornered. The first event went off like a cannon blast. Vintage Mustangs, Camaros, and growling Harleys rumbled across my pasture under a sky smeared with late-afternoon gold. Flags snapped in the breeze, rock music echoed from a makeshift stage, and the smell of barbecue drifted across the once quiet road that separated my farm from Silver Oaks. Karen Davenport stood on her porch in a crisp lemon-yellow pantsuit, arms folded, lips drawn tight as fishing line. She looked like a woman watching her empire burn, and I was holding the match. Cars backed up into her street. Vendors lined the edge of my property with tents, selling handmade leather goods, hot dogs, and motorcycle memorabilia. Attendees in denim vests with names like Iron Widows and Chrome Saints smiled and waved at curious onlookers. Most folks enjoyed the spectacle. Some HOA members even joined in. Karen, of course, did not. By the second event, an antique tractor pull and farm-to-table cookout, she'd filed her first formal complaint with the county. Noise violation, zoning breach, public safety hazard. All denied. I'd done my homework. The clause in my deed allowed up to 12 agriculturally aligned or community-enhancing events per year. I'd built temporary fencing to manage foot traffic, hired security, and even rented portable toilets to keep things contained. I operated well within the law, and Karen knew it. That's what made her so dangerous. Because people like Karen don't give up when they're beaten. They escalate. One morning I found my mailbox smashed in. Another day, someone snuck onto the property and scattered nails along the pasture entrance. My third event, a weekend petting zoo for kids, was interrupted by a sudden, anonymous visit from animal control. They found nothing wrong, but the message was clear. Karen was playing dirty now. She wanted to make life hell until I folded. So I doubled down. I converted an old tractor shed into a rustic barn venue and started accepting bookings for weddings and retreats. I leaned into the historic aspect of the land, drawing local historians and educators. I partnered with a local nonprofit to host community gardening classes on weekends. The irony: Karen had once lectured me about contributing to the neighborhood. Now I was doing it on my terms. Still something gnawed at me. For all her passive-aggressive antics and overreaches, Karen wasn't stupid. She was stubborn, yes, arrogant absolutely, but also calculating. Her HOA board was composed of retirees and bored mid-level professionals. But Karen, she played chess while others played checkers. I knew she was planning something. I just didn't know what. Until I got the certified letter. It was a formal summons to a county zoning hearing. Karen had petitioned to have my land's historic exemption status reviewed. According to her complaint, my series of events had transformed the property from a private residence into a commercial enterprise, which she claimed nullified the protections. It was clever. Underhanded but clever. If she succeeded, the county could reclassify the land. Which meant I'd be subject to zoning restrictions, permit requirements, and yes, HOA regulations. It would be the end of my independence. I took the letter and drove straight to the courthouse, boots still muddy from feeding the goats. The clerk confirmed it. The hearing was in 2 weeks. Karen had filed over 100 pages of complaints, community testimonies, photos, and doctored incident reports. She'd even claimed that my tractor nearly hit a child during the car show. That was a lie. And a challenge. I spent the next 10 days preparing like it was a trial. I collected statements from local vendors, neighbors who had attended the events, the sheriff's deputy who provided event security, and the veterinarian who vouched for my animals. I gathered every document tied to the land, some dating back 80 years, proving its continuous use for both agriculture and education. I even found a letter from the state's Department of Agriculture, praising my grandfather for community engagement through school visits and seasonal farm tours. That letter, embossed and signed in blue ink, carried legal weight. It demonstrated historic use with public benefit. The day of the hearing, I walked into the county office in my cleanest flannel shirt and carried a folder 2 inches thick. Karen sat across the room, flanked by 2 HOA board members in matching suits and condescending smirks. She didn't greet me. The zoning officer was a no-nonsense woman named Sandra. After reviewing both submissions, she looked up with an expression that could pierce steel. "Mr. Lawson, Ms. Davenport," she said. "We've reviewed both your claims. But before we proceed, I need to clarify. This property is historically protected and independently zoned. That protection is not contingent upon aesthetic alignment with nearby subdivisions. Is that understood?" Karen blinked. "But," Sandra raised a hand, "you've alleged Mr. Lawson has commercialized the land in a way that violates county code. However, your documentation lacks legal substantiation. His records show compliance. Furthermore, the property's events remain within allowable limits per its deeded exemptions." Karen's mouth tightened. "But he's undermining the community. Property values are not the concern of zoning enforcement," Sandra cut in. "Unless you have evidence of criminal wrongdoing or regulatory breach, this hearing is concluded." Silence. Karen's face paled, then flushed red. Her lips moved as if to object again, but no words came out. I didn't gloat. Not then. I just thanked Sandra and walked out, my boots echoing through the hall like the victory drums of a long war. Outside, the air tasted sweeter. The sun felt warmer. Karen had thrown everything at me. Letters, fines, threats, lies, and I'd stood firm. My grandfather would have been proud. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because now I had a decision to make. One that would push the final domino. I drove home, sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, and pulled out my phone. There was one more clause in the deed I hadn't used. A curious one Grandpa must have slipped in just for fun. It allowed me to lease the entire property, short-term, to out-of-county entities for educational or recreational purposes. Like, say, a month-long cultural exchange program. Or a private retreat in paradise? That night I made the call. The farm was about to get very quiet. And I was going to get very far away. The best revenge isn't loud. It's the kind that makes your enemy question reality. The kind where silence is strategy and absence becomes a statement. So I vanished. Not entirely, of course. But to Karen and the HOA, it sure felt that way. The morning after the zoning hearing, I posted a single notice on the farm's front gate. Property leased. No trespassing. Private retreat in progress. Duration 30 days. All inquiries will be handled by legal counsel. And with that I left. Booked a first-class ticket to Hawaii, courtesy of the generous deposit made by a private mindfulness retreat company out of Oregon. They'd seen my online ad, loved the concept of an off-grid rustic farm experience for their wealthy, tech-weary clientele. I handed over the keys, signed the paperwork, and let them handle the rest. Meanwhile, I checked into a bungalow overlooking the Pacific, traded boots for sandals, and let the waves scrub away months of Karen-induced stress. But the real show was back in Silver Oaks. You see, the retreat company brought with them 24 participants, 4 yoga instructors, 3 vegan chefs, and 1 mobile sauna unit the size of a food truck. Their idea of wellness included daily sunrise chants, nature walks that looped near HOA boundaries, and communal drum circles that echoed through the night. They weren't loud, just different. And different to Karen meant threatening. The text messages started 2 days into my vacation. Your property is hosting some sort of cult. Nudity. Is that allowed? Who approved these people meditating by the retention pond? I didn't respond. Karen tried calling. Once. 12 times. I watched her name light up on my screen while sipping a pineapple cocktail under palm trees. Blocked the number after call 16. She turned to email. Then to HOA newsletters. Then to a county petition to remove the retreat occupants due to disturbances, suspicious behavior, and potential spiritual trespass. Spiritual trespass. When that didn't work, she resorted to the local news. A headline ran in the Silver Oaks Weekly. Unlicensed commune operating in HOA backyard. But the county already knew. The lease was legal. The retreat was insured. Their operations were permitted under the same clauses she tried to use against me. It must have driven her mad. Unable to reach me, Karen targeted the retreat organizers. She had HOA members send passive-aggressive welcome baskets, complete with notes implying their presence was unwanted by the greater community. She even filed a noise complaint over the sound of meditation bells. Still the retreat thrived. Meanwhile, I was snorkeling in crystal-clear water, learning to surf, and letting every Karen-related worry slip beneath the waves. But I wasn't just relaxing. I was planning the final blow. You see, during all of Karen's chaos, she made a critical mistake. She'd used her position to authorize the HOA's use of my land during that fall festival, without a signed agreement, without a permit, and worst of all, for profit. Remember that. So did the IRS. Before leaving, I'd submitted a quiet tip. Nothing flashy. Just a detailed report linking HOA funds, ticket sales, and her own signature authorizing payment for vendors, all tied to an event on land they didn't own. The kind of thing that gets flagged. And while audits move slowly, when they move they hurt. Midway through my retreat, I got word from a neighbor. The HOA treasurer had resigned. No statement. Just a quiet email and a for sale sign on his lawn 2 days later. Karen was cracking. By the time I returned, sun-kissed and 10 pounds lighter, Silver Oaks was a circus. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting. Karen had been accused of misappropriation of funds and abuse of power. Several homeowners had begun petitioning to dissolve the current board altogether. And my retreat guests. They'd already booked next year's dates. I pulled into my driveway just as the last yoga mat was being rolled up. The organizer shook my hand, handed over a bonus envelope, and thanked me for protecting the spirit of the land. Smiled. Happy to share it with people who respect it. Karen, of course, didn't come by. But her silence was louder than any tantrum. I stood on my porch that evening, sipping coffee and watching the sun dip below the trees. The pasture was quiet again. The land had survived. Or had I? That night I emailed the HOA. Formal notice. Effective immediately. No HOA member is permitted to use or access any portion of my land for community events, parking, festivals, or HOA-related activities. Any violation will result in immediate legal action. Then I ended with a line I knew would haunt Karen. Perhaps next time try knocking. 2 weeks after my return, Karen Davenport was voted out of the HOA board. It wasn't a dramatic meeting. No shouting match, no tossed coffee mugs or ripped-up bylaws. Just a quiet, tension-thick evening at the Silver Oaks Community Center, where a weary group of homeowners, many of whom had once blindly followed her lead, finally reached their limit. One after another, neighbors stood up to recount stories of harassment, unsolicited fines, and what they now saw as a personal vendetta disguised as leadership. The retreat debacle had pushed them over the edge. So had the financial audit, which revealed that Karen had diverted community funds to cover bogus legal consultations, most of them dealing with me. She tried to defend herself. Course she did. Claimed it was all done in the interest of maintaining community standards. But no one was buying it anymore. She left before the vote was final, walking stiffly out the side door as if she hadn't already lost. That was her style. Retreat with her chin high, no matter how deep the wounds. I didn't attend the meeting. I didn't need to. I was on my porch that night, watching the stars blink to life over the pasture. The air smelled like fresh-cut hay. Peaceful. Steady. That's the thing about people like Karen. They think they're invincible until the world reminds them they're not. Until the balance tips and the community they once controlled learns to say no. Karen's house went up for sale 3 months later. Some said she moved to a gated retirement village in Arizona, where she could harass gardeners and mailbox installers to her heart's content. Others claimed she was trying to run for board president at her new HOA. I didn't care. Silver Oaks breathed easier without her. But here's the thing about winning. It doesn't feel like fireworks. Feels like quiet. Like waking up and not checking your email in dread. Like looking at your land and not wondering who's planning to use it against you. And I kept moving forward. The retreat company renewed their lease for the following year. 2 sessions instead of 1. I expanded the barn venue, booked several small weddings, and partnered with a local university for agricultural tours. What started as a legacy became a purpose. People began to see the farm not as an outlier, but as a cornerstone of the community. Even some Silver Oaks residents, former HOA loyalists, reached out to volunteer. They helped plant trees, painted fence posts, donated to the petting zoo fund. Without Karen's iron grip, the neighborhood changed, relaxed, grew. One evening Mrs. Linden, a sweet widow who'd once complained about goat smells, stopped by with a basket of zucchini bread. "I never realized how nice it is to have you next door," she said softly as we sat on the porch. "Before, everything felt tense. Now it feels like home again." I nodded, humbled. "Sometimes it takes a little shake-up to find balance." She smiled. "Or a vacation to Hawaii." We laughed. That farm, my grandfather's legacy, my refuge, had survived its trial by HOA fire. But more than that, I had survived it. I didn't bend. I didn't sell. I didn't get petty, even when the temptation came knocking. I chose the long game and I played it on my own terms. And Karen, she never once apologized. But she didn't need to. Her silence was apology enough. That winter I wrote a letter to the county board, commending Officer Sandra, the zoning officer who'd shut Karen down, for her professionalism. I attached a small jar of the farm's honey with a note that said, "Thanks for keeping the bees out of the henhouse." She responded with a smiley face and an invitation to speak at a local small farm symposium. Accepted. It felt good to be seen for more than just the guy who beat the HOA. Still, when spring returned and the retreat guests arrived once more, I couldn't help but smile as they settled into their cabins and unpacked yoga mats. One of them, a tech exec from San Francisco, approached me with curiosity. Is it true your HOA tried to take over this farm? Something like that, I said, brushing dust off my hat. They parked on my land without asking. What did you do? He grinned. Leased it out. Then went to Hawaii. He laughed, shaking his head. That's cold. No, I said, looking out across the golden fields. That's justice. And as the sun dipped low, casting a warm amber glow over every inch of soil I fought to protect, I knew one truth with absolute certainty. This farm belonged to me. Not to a board. Not to Karen. Not to anyone who thought rules were weapons and power was a prize. Just me and the people who respected it.